Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neal Bellon.
Welcome everyone, thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it. This week I'm going to be discussing using a chess engine for new or developing players. Maybe you're new to tournaments, maybe you're new to using a chess engine, or you've been using one, you're not quite sure if you're doing it correctly, and you want some tips. I'm going to be talking about that today because I do feel analyzing your games with an engine is a major component of any improvement plan. So I'm going to give some very practical and simple tips that will hopefully help. And I'll be looking at one of my own games as well. So you'll get a very pragmatic example of how to use an engine. Hope that helps. But first, let's go to the listener mailbag and see what you had to say.
You've got mail.
Our first email is from Ioannis from Greece. So shout out to our listeners in Greece. Great to hear from you over there. And he writes, Dear Neal, I hope this mail finds you well and also your family. Hope to have spent a great Christmas and New Year and bring you whatever you need, both in personal and family life. My name is Ioannis, John for short. I'm a listener of the podcast The Chess Angle in Greece. As you would have guessed it from the title, he put greetings from Greece in the subject line. That's what he's referring to. Where I was born and live. I am a little less than 50 years old and started to study and play chess some 10 years ago. When I was young, I had learned only the basics. Now that I have a family and child, I thought about restarting playing chess. So I go to a new chess club that was founded in 2019. There, I attend an adult class where we have our weekly lessons. Unfortunately, we are only 2 or 3 people at a time, only 2 hours a week, but that is not a problem because we enjoy every moment. I found your podcast as I was looking for chess podcasts to listen to every time I travel away from home for work. I enjoy it as it helps me improve myself in chess and also keeps me company when I drive. I am not FIDE rated at the moment. I hope to get rated sometime soon, but that's not my main concern. I enjoy playing a good game of chess, and I'm not interested in the result. Through the podcast, I was able to overcome my perspective about kids. I was, as a good father would do, supportive to the children I was playing with and playing terribly to let them win without a fight for myself. I was thinking that if I beat them, they were going to stop playing chess, and I would like to thank you for changing my perspective. Also, I love your philosophy about openings. As you say, we who have work, family, and are amateurs in chess, we must play the same openings because of our limited time that we have to study chess. At the last tournament I participated, I tried many openings just to see how it would go. After I heard your opinion about the London system and studied some basic lines, I have decided to try it in the next tournament and hopefully use it as my main weapon with white. For the black pieces, as for now, I try playing the Scandinavian against e4 with the queen going back to d1 variation. I liked your podcast about the French, episode 36. I am thinking of studying the basic lines you mentioned to have it as an alternative in my repertoire and maybe also use it as my main weapon. For d4, I am looking for the Slav, semi-Slav, or Nimzo-Indian. I haven't decided yet. I must tell you that I have been listening to the podcast from the beginning. I know that I have a lot to learn about chess from the remaining episodes and improve my chess, and this podcast will help me. Hope I didn't bother or bore you a lot with this email. Also hope you could cope with my English, as I am not very good. Hope to hear from you soon. And again, best regards from Greece. As always, hope to win your next game, Ioannis. Well, let me say, Ioannis, you did not bore me at all This was a great email. I really appreciate it. And it's personal for me because, as some listeners may know, my wife is Greek. Okay, my wife's family is from Greece. They're from Chios. Okay, so again, this was very personal to me. Also, my father-in-law's name is John or Ioannis as well. He's here in America now, but he was born in Greece. So, we do have a connection. So, John, if I'm ever your way, if I ever go to Greece again, we were there about 12 years ago. And if I'm ever there again, not sure if we're going to go back, but I will definitely look you up and we'll sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk. I'd love to meet you. A couple of things I want to touch on in your email. First of all, you spoke a lot about enjoying the game and enjoying every moment. That's fantastic. And it's really important because I know many of us, myself included, I'm definitely guilty of this. We get so obsessed with improvement and rating, and we sometimes have trouble with losses that we lose sight of the fact that chess is just a fantastic game. It's a fantastic activity. It's a great hobby to have because, many people don't have that. They don't have this type of hobby, whether it's an intellectual or thinking type of hobby or otherwise, whatever it might be. Many people, it's just, work and that's it. They don't have this outlet in their lives. So we should all be grateful that we have that. So I think you have a fantastic attitude. And then you mentioned about sticking with the same openings. Yes, that is definitely my thing, because once you have a set repertoire, you can kind of just stick with it and you just sort of need to brush up, tweak it. You don't have to obsess over openings and study endless amounts of theory because you have your set repertoire, you're used to the positions. But what you're doing now, I agree with and is correct. You're kind of experimenting to determine what your opening repertoire is. So it's almost counterintuitive. In order to not jump around and stick to the same openings, you kind of have to jump around and try different openings, right? To not jump around, you have to jump around. And I know for my own opening repertoire, which I've spoken about ad nauseum, I won't get into it now. I think everybody knows what I play just from listening to a few episodes, but that took me really years to sort of refine and come to terms with. And some of the openings I use now, I had dismissed at first, but the truth is I just didn't give it a fair enough shot. And you really have to determine, is it that the opening is not for you, or is it a bad choice, or is it just that you need to learn it better and you really haven't sat with it and spent enough time with it. I mentioned that about the Nimzo Indian. I tried it. I kind of blew it off at first, and then I rediscovered it, and now I love it. And the problem was I really didn't give it enough of a shot. You can't use an opening in 1 or 2 tournaments or even 3 or 4 tournaments, and maybe you don't have good results, and then you just dismiss it. But is it really the opening? Or is it just you need to develop more as a player? Was it more of a tactical thing? So I think what you're doing is great. You're kind of trying different openings, but ultimately the goal will be, as you experiment more and more, you'll determine which openings you like, and then that'll be part of your regular repertoire. I really appreciate it, Ioannis. Really, really nice email. I'm going to hang on to this, and like I said, if I'm ever your way, I'll definitely look you up, and we'll sit down for a nice long cup of coffee. Great to hear from you, and really appreciate you listening to the pod. And once again, shout out to all of our listeners in Greece. Our next email is from Lindell from Germany. So this is great. Shout out to our friends in Europe. Europe is in the house for the chess angle. We love it. Anyhow, Lindell writes, I listened to your podcast on my way to school and back, and thanks to you, I finally found the courage to go to a chess club. Well, you know what? I really appreciate that, Lindell. That really means a lot that the podcast had such an effect on you. Let me continue Lindell's letter. He says, to motivate myself during my tactics training, I write down all my results in Puzzle Rush mode in an Excel spreadsheet. This way I can calculate an average and graph my results. Just 3 weeks and 400 puzzle rushes later, I discovered a little progress. 20 to about 22.5 average in 3 minutes. Unfortunately, it always demotivates me to think that my skills will decrease significantly if I stop this training again. Neither in my chess club nor on the internet can I find an answer to how much one's skills decline after a certain period of time without training. If that's too strong, I don't want to put in too much effort. Thank you for your dedication in creating such insightful content. Looking forward to your response. Best regards. P.S. Just wanted to share that I always anticipate the solo episodes the most. Thanks, Lindell, for your email. Couple of things going on there. You have like 2 or 3 sort of separate things the way I'm understanding your email. So let me sort of work backwards. As far as you enjoying the solo episodes, it's funny. Others have made similar comments. Not that they don't like the interview episodes, but we do have a number of people like yourself who actually like the solo episodes a little bit more. I mean, it's mixed. Other people have said they like the interview episodes, but of course, that's how it is. To each his own. Everyone's going to have his or her preference. You're never going to please anybody, or everybody, I should say. Yeah, the solo episodes are really my love. They're sort of my baby. That's what sort of was the impetus for this podcast, is that I just felt like I had something to say. I felt like I had something to contribute to the discourse on chess and improvement, especially for those of us who have families and lives outside of chess. And as I mentioned before, longtime listeners of the podcast will forgive me because they've heard me give this speech before. I actually never intended to do interview episodes. When I first did this, I was like, okay, I'm going to be sort of like, a Rush Limbaugh type, as far as, just one guy in front of a mic, just do my thing. And I was like, I'm not doing interview episodes. That's going to be too much. That's a little. And of course, as with any project, as with any creative project, as you go further into it, it sort of takes on a life of its own, and things that you didn't consider, you now want to do. And it's funny. I really do enjoy the interview episodes as well. I kind of like that back and forth between the solo and the interview episodes. It kind of gives a nice touch to the content. And that's why when I talk about plans and ideas for the podcast, I try not to speak in absolutes, because you may say, I don't really want to do this. And then you decide months later, well, you do want to do this. Or you'll say, I want to do something. And then you realize, no, it's not going to work. That's how it goes. But, I appreciate that. And for you, I guess, which is good because you like them, there's always going to be more solo episodes than interview episodes, at least at this point in time. We'll see what happens. Now let's talk about Puzzle Rush. Now, from the tenor of your email, you seem to be using it as your main method of tactics training. I mean, I look at it this way. Puzzle Rush for me, because there's many, many opinions on Puzzle Rush. For me, it's really a tool, right? It's an exercise for tactical speed. I use it myself. I've spoken about it. I spoke about my Puzzle Rush +1 plan. Like if I'm busy, if I'm going through a phase where I really can't focus on chess study, I'll do like a Puzzle Rush and maybe like one quick other thing if I only have like 15 minutes a day or something like that. But I don't consider Puzzle Rush a legitimate standalone study activity. Others will disagree with me on that. I think it's a great warm-up before, let's say, a study session, or maybe before a tournament, as long as you don't overdo it. And there are people who really swear by Puzzle Rush and they consider it a major part of their training. But your chess study training, it needs to be more than just Puzzle Rush. I don't know, Lindell, if you meant you're just doing this as part of your tactics training or if it's your only tactics training, but I don't think Puzzle Rush by itself is really a dedicated standalone tactical study plan. Although you could argue that it could be, that's just my take. And then you spoke about how one's skills decline over a period of time if you stop training. Of course, it really depends on the person. Like, I'm reminded of a lot of musicians. This is sort of a parallel to music. All right. Many of you know I'm a music teacher by day. That's my vocation. And when I was doing gigs and stuff, I don't really do gigs anymore. Just other things going on now in my life. But when I was a younger man and I was doing a lot of gigs and stuff and playing in wedding bands and jazz bands. And any of you who are musicians, you can relate to this. I mean, I worked with guys who they would barely pick up their instrument at all, right? They would go days without playing, and then they could pick it up and they played like a monster. I mean, some people are just wired that way. Now for chess, they say if you take a long break from studying or from playing in tournaments and then you go back to it, you know, they say, I mean, there's no hard scientific data on this, but they say typically expect to lose about 200 points in your rating. That may not happen. What I mean by that is if you stop playing in tournaments and you stop training, basically you don't even look at a chessboard, and then you decide, you know what, I want to get back into this. And then maybe you start studying again and you start playing in tournaments. They say expect to lose about 200 points. That's typical. It might be more, it might be less. It really depends, Lindell, on, you know, the overall picture. Maybe you're not playing in tournaments, but you're still training. Or maybe you are playing in tournaments, but you're not studying that much. It really depends. It's hard to give a concrete answer. It's hard to quantify that specifically. But as a general answer, I mean, yes, the less you study and play, your rating's probably going to take a hit. I would go by your tournament results. I wouldn't put too much stock in Puzzle Rush. I would not put all your eggs in one basket as far as your tactics training. And again, Puzzle Rush, it's a very specific kind of thing, right? Because you're looking to move fast because of time. You know that it's generally going to be an offensive move. You just, you know, you're going to look for a sacrifice or a mate. You're not really stopping and thinking and analyzing the position. Like I said, Puzzle Rush is not bad. I use it. I'm not bashing Puzzle Rush, but it's a tool. All right. It's a tool that can be part of your training, but I don't think you should put all your eggs in that one basket. Really look at your actual games, at your tournament games, because I will tell you this, anecdotally, there are people with pretty decent ratings whose Puzzle Rush scores are average, I'll say. And there are players whose rating isn't that great, but for some reason they do really, really well on Puzzle Rush. And that could be because it really just focuses on that one specific thing. As sort of a summary, I wouldn't put too much stock in Puzzle Rush. Don't look at it as the be all and end all for your tactical skill. Like I said, it's a tool, enjoy it, but I would really go by your game results. So again, Lindell, I appreciate the kind words. Thanks so much for your email. And now let's talk about using a chess engine for developing players. This episode is a follow-up to episode 45 of this podcast, which was titled The Truth About Chess Engines for Club Players. This week, I'm going to get a little more specific and hands-on, but if you didn't check out episode 45, you may want to do that. You don't have to listen to that first. You can listen to these out of sequence. They're standalone episodes, but I'll put a link for it in the show description, or again, you could just look for number 45 of this podcast. But I wanted to just follow up again with some more specifics and some more detail. And the engine I'm going to be using for this episode is going to be the chess.com analysis engine, which I believe is Stockfish. But I'm also going to refer to Fritz as well, which I have on my desktop. That's a great program. It's been around a long time. That was my first engine. I used it for many, many years. I'm going to also analyze a game where I actually did not play my best. It was actually like a bad win, right? You know those games where you won, but it was like, oh my God, that was ugly. I was almost lucky that I won. It was one of those games. And the reason I chose that is because for using a chess engine, that's going to be much more instructive because there were a lot of missteps, a lot of mistakes, a lot of things I missed. And rather than use a game where I played pretty well and pretty clean with very few mistakes, that's not really going to be as instructive. So I'm putting my ego aside and picking a game where I did win, but it wasn't pretty. Now, before we begin using the actual engine, a couple of things to keep in mind, just some general things when analyzing with an engine. First of all, you want to avoid what they call outcome bias when analyzing your games. Now, outcome bias means you're judging a decision simply by its outcome and not the decision-making process. So maybe you made a move where you got lucky, like your opponent had a response and he didn't see it. It's very easy to go, all right, well, it doesn't matter because, I won the game, or it doesn't matter because the position was still even. No, you do need to look at your thought process. Don't just look at the outcome and say, well, it's fine because it turned out okay. That's what outcome bias is, and you want to avoid that when analyzing. You also want to analyze the whole game, not just, that quote unquote one bad move. First of all, you may be wrong. Okay. You might think it's a bad move and it actually wasn't as bad. Or even if it was a bad move, you might have had some resources later in the game. Like, let's say you made this bad move. It was a blunder. And then you resigned 10 moves later. What you might have realized was that during those 10 moves, after your mistake, you could have turned it around, or maybe you had a chance for a swindle. So don't just fall into the trap of, okay, I know where I went wrong. I just need to look at that one move. Or I know where I went wrong. We don't need to analyze the game. That's a very dangerous trap to get into. And of course, it's easier to do that when you lost the game, right? If we won the game, but we know we played poorly, which is kind of the game I'm going to look at today, it's very easy to continue the analysis because you won. But if you lost the game, it's like, oh, I don't want to do it. You have to fight through it, okay? Because I know it can be very, very annoying looking at an embarrassing loss, right? You just want to throw out the score sheet or just delete it and forget about it. But it's those tough losses that you really need to look at, because if you don't face those head on, you're not going to improve or clean up your mistakes. You do need to stop and be introspective as to why you played a bad move. An engine can help with that. Now, I have to disagree with my good friend, FM Alex King, who was on the podcast with his students. He doesn't seem to be as interested in that. He just wants them to understand that the move was wrong and move on. But I do believe you need to look at why you played it. So you made a mistake or you missed something thematic that you've seen 100 times, which is what happened in my game, as you'll see in a moment. You have to say, like, why, what was my thought process? What was I thinking? Is there something I can change so I don't do it again? So you can use an engine for those sort of psychological ideas as well. All right. When you review the game, because using an engine, you're also reviewing the game introspectively. It's not just about looking at the engine analysis, right? That's part of it. Also, don't be Captain Literal when interpreting the engine analysis. All right. Remember, the engine looks at it from the point of view that the opponent will make the best response. It's almost like the engine analyzes it as if two computers are playing each other, right? It always looks for like the best optimal response. Obviously, with humans, it doesn't work that way. I'll give some specific examples as we go to kind of explain what I mean by that. But understand, for tactics and mating threats, those are pretty much 100% accurate as far as the engine analysis, meaning if you or your opponent had a tactical shot, or if you or your opponent had a mating threat, or any type of move that would give you a major advantage, the engine will catch that. They pretty much are 100% accurate when it comes to mating threats and mating attacks and tactical shots, right? If you could have won a piece or a pawn, the engine will catch it. All right. So that's another thing with engines. You can work on your tactics because, again, it'll show you what you missed or what your opponent missed. And again, the engine is a guide. It goes back to that Captain Literal statement I made. It's not about whether you played the top move each time. Like, don't think, oh, well, I didn't play the top move or I didn't play the top two moves, so it was a bad move. No, the engine will give you suggested lines. Now, you can have it give you as many lines as you want. I generally do 4 lines. That's what I like. I think less than 4 is not quite enough. And if it's more than 4, I think it gets overwhelming. But remember, with certain positions, especially if it's not really a sharp dynamic position, there might be 5, 6, 7 moves or more that are all reasonable. So don't think, oh, well, I didn't play the best move. I didn't play the top move, so it was a bad move. No, only worry about not playing those types of moves, like if you missed a tactic or if you missed a mate. Obviously, that you have to look at. But if it's something a little more subtle, more positional, there might be 4 or 5 reasonable moves that you can make. You also want to explore alternate lines and what if scenario, like what if I had done this? I do that a lot because that's going to help you with tactical awareness and decreasing blunders. Like, for example, okay, here I played A5, but I was looking at knight C3. What if I had done that? And then you might realize, okay, well, no, actually knight C3 doesn't work because he has this response. Like, go down those rabbit holes. Or what if I had done this? Because you all know what I'm talking about. During the game, you played a move and then you're kind of wondering, oh, should I have done this? You need to go down those rabbit holes. Don't just say, okay, well, I played this. It worked out fine, so I won't look any further. No, that's how you really understand positions and openings. And you might find that some of these alternate lines were actually good. Maybe they were better. Maybe they were worse. Maybe they were blunders. But if you don't quite understand it, you need to make those explorations and do those sidelines as well. Now, before we get to the game, let's talk about what the engine numbers mean, what they really mean for two humans. So if you look at Fritz, I'm going to use Fritz first, and then I'll go to the chess.com engine, Stockfish, which is what many of you probably use. But if you go to Fritz or some of the other more traditional engines, what they'll do in the analysis, they'll have a numerical number, but they'll also have that plus and the minus thing. And you have to remember, and I spoke about this in the previous episode, be very careful how you interpret those because, again, we're looking at two humans playing each other. And the computer analysis, the engine analysis really looks at it almost as if two computers are playing each other because it looks at the optimal response. So it's very easy to get bogged down in what those mean. So what usually happens is if it says plus next to minus, like plus minus, that means white is winning. That's usually pretty accurate even for two humans. Minus plus would mean that black is winning. Okay. Now, when you see one on top of the other, like you'll see a plus over a minus, right? Or a minus over a plus. Plus over minus would mean that white is better. Minus over plus is that black is better. When two humans play, I wouldn't get too caught up in that. That could almost mean an equal position. All right. So you always have to take it a few notches down from what the computer says. Now, if you see something like plus over equals, or equals over plus, that means one player is slightly better. But plus over equals would mean that white is quote unquote slightly better. But when two humans play, as far as I'm concerned, that's the same as equal. Because now we're getting into like basically a computer analysis where they're looking at it so literally that, that small minuscule difference where it says, let's say white is slightly better, that's basically a drawn position as far as I'm concerned when two humans play. All right. Now, when you get into, again, where it's like white is clearly winning or white is much, much better, and the number is like, 2, 3, or 4 points higher, then it's probably more accurate with two humans. But the analysis where it says that white or black is only slightly better, that's pretty much an equal position as far as I'm concerned. Because when two humans play, there are going to be major mistakes or minor mistakes, but there are going to be mistakes, lots of them. They could be tactical, they could be positional. You're not looking at perfect play, especially at the club level. Now, on the chess.com engine, they also have an opening book and other features for further study. So if you click on that, you can actually explore the specific opening. You can get away from your actual game. You can look at a database of other games that use that opening. So, you can really kind of go down as many rabbit holes as you want. And the other thing I like about an engine, by repeating a difficult position or a sequence over and over, you are essentially creating your own training exercise within the engine. After all, most chess puzzles and exercises come from actual games. So what you could do is you could take a screenshot or save separately, certain positions from your game, and then you can review them over and over as sort of a training exercise. All right. So again, these are all the benefits of an engine. We also see by using an engine the importance of sticking with the same openings. You'll see the same positions and structures appear, and you'll be more familiar with them. You'll understand how to play them. And then what you do, I assume that you do this when you use an engine, you save your games in a database. And because you're using the same openings and sticking with the same repertoire, you'll basically have a collection of all these different positions from the same opening. And you're going to see the patterns. And because you become more familiar, because you're sticking with the same openings, you're going to play with more confidence. You're going to use less time on your clock. All right. So I just sort of shoved down a whole bunch of information. So what I'm going to do now, if that seemed a little overwhelming for some of you, I'm actually going to look at a game, and I think it's going to make it a lot easier. All the things I mentioned and all the things I talked about, I'm going to use now as I look at a game. Now, I'm not going to look at the game, let's say, from top to bottom. I'm going to show you very specifically how I use an engine to review a game and learn and study. I'm going to be using the chess.com engine because, again, I think that's what most people are using. It's fantastic. It's web-based, which is great. I know I spoke about Online Fritz, the chess-based online suite, which is also excellent. But, I have to be honest, lately I've been using the chess.com one a little bit more. Okay, I really do like it, but ChessBase also has an online engine as well. Now, Fritz is a separate download. I have that on my desktop. That's also from ChessBase. So, sometimes I'll go back and forth. Sometimes I'll use Fritz. Sometimes I'll use chess.com. I mean, I like chess.com because it's kind of 1, 2, 3. I can just import the PGN and off you go. They also have some really nice analysis features and a review feature. We're going to get into that now. And what I did, in case you're interested, I put a PGN of the game in the show notes, even though I'm a little embarrassed by how I played. But again, it's that type of game where an engine is going to be most beneficial. It's really not going to do us any good to learn how to use an engine if I put in a game where I was having a great night. And one other comment about that before we get to the game, this just shows the reality of the amateur level, which is that it's always tough playing after work. You're never really going to be playing with a full tank of gas, right? It's after work, you're late, you're tired. And what happens is when you're playing at night after work and, you're tired and, even if you didn't have a crazy day at work, it's just, it's a lot playing after work. And the way that affects your game is the fatigue. It just affects your analysis. It sometimes makes you play more impulsively. But the main issue is that you're not analyzing as thoroughly as you should sometimes. It may not cause you to blunder, but as you'll see with me, it may cause you to not see the best continuation. And often that best continuation is something that you're already familiar with. It's not like it was some crazy tactic that only a GM would see. Because it's funny, you're going to hear me say as I analyze this, like, oh, I had this move. How did I and I'm going to stop and think, okay, what was going on that I missed a move that I've seen many times before, or with my knowledge and experience, I should have known about. And that's just the reality of it. And I was thinking my new thing was going to be that if I felt really tired, I wasn't going to play anymore. And then I realized that that's ridiculous. If I made a vow to only play chess at the club when I was feeling 100%, I would pretty much never play. That's just how it is. So I just own that. I own that a lot of my games are going to be ugly. They're going to be scrappy. And when you play at night after work, that's just how it is. And the only time I'm not going to play is if, obviously I have to take a bye because I have another commitment or a family commitment, or if I'm actually physically ill, like if I'm actually sick, if I'm fighting a headache, then it's silly to play. But for me to say, oh, I'm just not going to play tonight, it's been a long day. Yeah, if I have that attitude, I'll never play. And I'm just going to accept the fact that I'm going to try my hardest to win, but it's going to be tough some nights, and that's just how it goes. But for the most part, my opponent is going through the same thing. So in a way, it's kind of an even playing field, all right, for the most part. So just some things about just chess psychology and the reality of playing as someone who works full time and, with a family. That's just how it goes. The games are going to be ugly, and I'm trying to not beat myself up as much when I don't play perfectly, because playing, say, at 8, 9 at night is very different from, say, playing at, 10 a.m. when you're all rested and you've just had coffee. But, tournaments don't take place at 10 a.m. and, we have work. That's just how life is. So I've just accepted the fact that I'm never going to really be playing with a full tank of gas. All right. And that's just how it goes. I own that. So without further ado, let's actually get to the game and put all this information that I mentioned to use in a practical way. So hopefully by actually demonstrating it in use, this will make it a little easier to understand. And again, I'm not saying this is the way or the only way. This is just how I personally use an engine. I'm simply sharing my process. I'm not saying you have to do it this way, but I do contend again that using an engine is an essential part of your development as a player and becoming stronger. So here we go. All right. So for this game, I was white. Okay. This was played at the club over the board. Long Island Chess Club, US chess rated. It was game 90 with a 10-second delay. My opponent was rated 1630. For this game, it says I was 1739. Now, where my rating is now, because I like to be upfront and honest about these things, about 4 years ago, I'm too lazy to pull up the USCF chart right now. I apologize, but I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. My peak rating was 1885. And I'm like, oh, this is great, right? 115 points to expert. And then, boom, I took a hit. What happened was, at that time, I don't know if it was just maybe some underrated players at the club. Maybe I hit a little bit of a slump. But what happened was, I rapidly fell. I had some bad outings at the club, and then maybe I tilted a little bit. But then what happened was, right when I started falling, instead of working my way back up, I started going for my doctorate. And then it never really, I never really had a chance to build it up because that took up so much of my time. So basically what happened was I went from 1885, okay? No ego here. I am putting my ego aside because I suspect a lot of people who went through this wouldn't want to talk about it publicly, but I'm just going to say it like it is because I think a lot of you can relate to this. So I was 1885. I dropped down all the way to my floor, which was 1600, which was a big hit on my ego. That really, really messed with my head. So I went down, what is that? My math is terrible. 285 points. Okay. I went from 1885 to 1600. So those of you going through rating swings or whatever, don't feel badly because I go through it too. So 1885 to 1600, and that was my floor. So technically it might have even been a little bit lower than that. And then I'm working my way back up. I was 1739 here. I think right now I'm like maybe 1670, 1680. And, I'm slowly working my way back up. So my goal right now is just to get back over 1800. Now that I finished my doctorate and finished grad school, my head's a little clearer. I'm hoping to get back to that, but this is going to be an interesting experiment. If I don't get back to it, then, well, you know what? Grad school and my busy life, that really had nothing to do with it. Maybe it's just my own personal chess or the way that the scene is, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens now. Now, if it does go back up to where it was, then I can just say, okay, yeah, it was grad school. You were busy. Don't beat yourself up. I'm just sharing that because these rating swings are real. Okay. And I've been out of the 1800s for some time now. So right now, my whole thing is, listen, no excuses. You're done with grad school. I don't want to hear about that you're tired after work. I don't want to hear about rating deflation. I don't want to hear about just play, just man up and play. That's my goal right now. So I just wanted to be honest about that. And here's the game. So if you go on to the chess.com engine, if you save a game in your library, let's say, it'll say like details, analyze, classroom, share, download. So the chess.com features are great because, you can share your position, you can share your game, whatever you want to do. So I'm going to click on analyze, and that brings us into the analysis room. And you'll see the engine running up top. It'll have evaluations and it'll have these lines. Like, for example, in the opening position, it already says white. It says plus 0, 1.7, which is basically meaningless. All right. So as far as the numbers, I know I talked about the plus and the minus. The numbers, like if it's anything less than 1, like 0.10, 0.20, that means equal. Because remember, this is going by a computer analysis as if you had, two perfect engines playing each other, so to speak. So like I said, don't get too caught up in the numbers if it's below like 1, or even if it's below like, 1.5. Like, for example, one player might have like a 1.02 advantage. Like it'll say black's better by 1.02. That's close to equal or drawish for two humans playing, as far as I'm concerned. Now, if two GMs are playing, that 1.02 difference, that could be decisive. But when two amateurs go at it, probably not so much, unless it's like a very concrete sort of end game. And, there might be certain concrete positions where that's true. But generally speaking, don't get too caught up in the numbers unless it's like, 2, 3, 4 or more. Then it's probably more accurate. So in other words, the lower you go with the numbers, the more drawish it probably is, because you're dealing with two humans. The higher the number, then it's probably much more accurate and applicable to humans. So let's look at the analysis room and all these choices we have. So you have analysis, you have review, and then details and openings. Those are on the upper right. Now, if you click on review, what that does, it gives a score for the whole game, and it lists like brilliant, great move, best move, excellent, good, all those things. At the bottom, it also gives a projected rating for each player, which I don't always take too literally. Like for this one, it says the game was pretty competitive. The opening was balanced. It was a well-fought middle game that white got the better of. The players battled pretty evenly in the end game. So it says my estimated rating is 1800 based on how I performed, which I don't know if I'm buying because this was not a good outing for me. And then it says my opponent's rating is 1600. But I have to say those are pretty accurate to probably what we really are. So, but I mean, other times I've had games where it says my estimated rating was like 2200, and that's not the case. So, I don't know how literally you should take these. That's why I'm always saying, this is a tool. You're going to hear me say it a lot. This is really a tool. All right. But going back to the analysis. So I'm playing through the game. It's a London system. Big surprise. So D4, knight F6, bishop F4. Then he played D6, E3, knight B, D7. This is all typical stuff. So we're making some moves here. And I'm not going to go through each move because as you play, you're going to see like these little stars like, C4 is best or B6 is good with the thumbs up. Again, don't get too caught up in that. If you played an alternate move, that's also good. And here we have a situation where black made a mistake and I didn't take advantage of it. So the way it works is in the London, right? The knight, if it's on C3, because usually it's knight B, D2, the queen side's knight. But in this case, I did C4 and then knight C3. And the thing is, the knight going to B5 and attacking C7 along with the F4 bishop, that's a major theme in the London system, especially the Jabava. But in this case, I should have seen it. But what my opponent did, he played this move D5 attacking my C4 pawn. And I got so focused on the pawns because that's not a typical move, that D5 here, anyway, in this particular position, that I missed this knight jump, which would have attacked C7 and attacking black's C7 square. That's like a major theme in the London. So like looking at it now, I'm like, yeah, knight B5. But of course I missed it in the game because I saw this pawn move. I got distracted. Maybe I was tired. So here's where you can use the engine. Say, okay, what was my thought process? Like why did I not play this knight B5 move which looking at it now seems so clear, right? Because I'm sure you guys go through that too. Like you look at it in the engine, like, how did I miss that? That's just the human factor of playing over the board. Now, my thinking was, if I take the pawn, which I did, I would open the C file and attack C7 that way. Not a bad plan. It's playable. Okay. The position's still even. I didn't blunder, but the plan of knight b5 was just much stronger. But at least when I played the move I did, I had an idea. I wasn't just trading pawns. My thinking was that I would open the C file, get a rook on C1. But in reviewing this, I should have seen knight b5. Okay, but I'm still fine. Okay, so we trade in the middle. It's still pretty much even. All right, so I have a rook on the open C file now. I'm looking at his C7 pawn. And, he's playing well. And I'm looking at one position where I moved my queen to a certain square, but I was looking at some alternate moves. All right, and it doesn't matter. You don't need to have the position in your head right now. I'm just telling you how to use an engine. So what I'm trying now are some of these alternate lines. Like, what if I had done this? What if I had done this? And so I can learn from it that way, because the position now, the D file is completely open. We have rooks facing each other. And that's often a very thematic thing. Like, do I trade or do I let him trade? Or what happens if he takes my rook? What happens if I take, you have to look at those tactics, because very often when there's an open file and you can trade down, who's going to end up controlling the file when it all comes out in the wash, that type of thing. And this is typical where you end up just trading rooks on the file. But I'm just looking at some ideas here. There was a move where he attacked my queen, not really attacked it, but my queen and rook are on the D file. And then he moved his rook on that file, but his bishop's blocking it. So obviously he's looking now for some type of tactic where if he moves his bishop, his rook then attacks my queen. And so I had to move my queen, and I thought a lot about where I should move it. And I moved it to queen f4. And the reason, like, this is how you use an engine. I had a lot of choices to move my queen. And I'm looking at all these different possibilities. What if I had gone here? Turns out my chosen move was good. Then he attacked my queen again. And it turns out that I actually moved it to the best square. It was the engine's, number one recommendation. But just remember, even if I had moved my queen to, let's say, the second, third, or fourth choice, I would have been totally fine. So, don't get too caught up with that. But I just remember in the game, and this is where we get into psychology, when I moved my queen here, I took a lot of time. All right. Because remember, these subtle little mistakes can often, decide the game. So I moved my queen over to h4, which was probably the best decision. But again, the way I would use an engine now, I'm not going to bore you with the process, but I would basically try all these. Well, what if I had gone here with the queen? Or, there was another square I was actually thinking about moving my queen to during the game. So I tried doing that. And, so you look at all these different possibilities. Don't just sort of just rush through the game and, oh, okay, fine. I want, you have to look at all these different ideas. So he trades down the file, and here he started to slip a little bit. Okay, now here's an interesting situation. I actually missed a tactic, right? I had this, basically I could have gone knight takes e5, knight takes pawn, and he can't take back with the pawn because it's pinned to his queen. So I could have won a pawn here. Very elementary tactic, but I guess this was, later in the game fatigue. I moved my queen instead. Now here's the thing. It's marked as an X by the engine. It's a miss. But it's not a blunder. The position's still even. I just happened to miss a tactic. But as it goes at the amateur level, it didn't matter because he ended up blundering the next move anyway. So I had this knight takes pawn shot. I could have won a pawn. Basic tactic I missed. A little embarrassed about that. But again, that's how it goes. OTB. Another night I would have gotten it. So I missed a tactic here that I should have gotten. But the queen move I played, even though it was a miss, it was fine. But then he made this move, knight d3, double question mark blunder. As soon as he did this move, then I saw I was completely winning. It was pretty much over here. Okay, my move wasn't a blunder. I just missed a tactic that won a pawn. And again, as I've always said, I'd rather that. I'd rather miss a winning move and the alternate move I make is not a blunder, then you just blunder, right? As long as you don't blunder. Okay, so fine, I missed that pawn. I'm reviewing this over and over right now. Like, what was my thought process that I missed that tactic? I just didn't see it. It could have just been fatigue. It could have just been, sometimes you just miss it. You're looking at the whole position and you just miss a tactic. So I would review that. So he makes this blunder here, and I have two main moves to play to take advantage. So I really took my time here. It turns out the move that I played is what the engine likes best, but there was an alternative that's also winning. Now, here's where you get into the numbers. The move I make here, which was Queen E6 check, because he made a knight move that allowed a winning check with my queen, and then I'm going to penetrate with my knight, and I'm going to win a piece. But you're going to see how after I won the piece, I almost blew the win. Okay, so this is why I'm choosing this game. Yeah, I am going to beat myself up because I forgot about this later blunder. So in addition to that knight b5 early on, I also screwed up the ending, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, he makes this double question mark blunder, and it says if I go queen e6 check, which is what I played, it's plus 3.31. Now that's pretty winning for white, even for two humans. If I go bishop takes d3, that's 3.09. And let me tell you something, for two humans, 3.31 and 3.09, that's pretty much the same thing. So either way, I'm winning. But I played queen e6 check, and I get this decisive attack. He goes, moves his king to f8, and then I jump knight d6. And I have this killer attack on his king. And remember, if you can attack your opponent's king with the queen and knight, that is lethal. The queen and knight is one of the most lethal combinations in the game, and the reason is each has move abilities that the other does not, so they complement each other very well. Queen and knight is nasty. If your king is being attacked by your opponent's queen and knight, and you can't, defend it easily, good luck to you. So this is nasty right now, and of course, you know how it is now. I'm attacking, it's decisive, so he's getting frustrated. He played, queen e7, which was all he had. And here I saw that I win a piece. So we trade queens. And then here I slipped up, and I should have been patient. I won a piece here, but what happens is I end up getting my knight trapped. I now am attacking two of his pieces, right? Because of the blunder he made. I'm attacking his b7 bishop, which is not defended. I'm also attacking his d3 knight. So this was the kind of thing where I needed to move one piece, check his king, and then when he moves his king, I pick up his knight with my bishop while defending my knight. But what I did was I did knight takes b7, which is a mistake, and then he moves his king over, and my knight has no escape squares, and I almost blew the win. And this is why you really, really have to stop and take your time. But this is what happens when you get tired and you play at night. You sometimes either get a little too impulsive, or you just don't analyze. So here I'm thinking, oh, knight takes b7. I could play almost, I could capture whatever I want here, right? And I'm fine, but I was wrong. So I misplayed, and now my advantage is like 1.00 when it could have been like 2.64, which is a big difference. So this is a classic example of winning a piece, but then misplaying in the aftermath. I should have taken my time and analyzed, but I didn't. I got lazy because I got tired. And then he actually played pretty well here. And then it turns out I needed to give up my extra piece for a pawn because of the mistake I made. I'm playing this in the engine over and over. See, this is where the engine comes in. You try all these different lines. Where did I go wrong? And I was correct in sacrificing my extra piece for a pawn. And then luckily, because my endgame technique is pretty good, that is one of my strengths, I was able to pull out the win, but I had to work 10 times harder than I needed to. Like right now, my advantage went to almost 3.0 to 0.13, which is pretty much drawish. Like right now, the position's pretty much drawish. I only won now because he ended up blundering, and I played very accurately from this point on. All right, so I got my head together. I said, okay, stop beating yourself up. What's done is done. right? It's a sunk cost thing. Don't start looking back, because that's a dangerous thing. Oh, what if I had done this during the game? You can't look back. Like, you got to play the position that's in front of you. My king was very active, and, he started to make some inaccuracies, here. And then, I ended up turning it around. And the other thing was, it's an open position with pawns on both sides of the board. I have the bishop, he has the knight. So obviously that tends to be an advantage. It's not always, but usually, on an open board with pawns on both sides, the bishop can often be an advantage because of its long-term abilities. And I took advantage of that. And I ended up, basically, we traded down and it was a winning king and pawn endgame. I went from having an advantage and winning a piece to screwing up the follow-up. And then I had to work 10 times harder in the endgame. And that's what happens in these situations. The game ends up being like an hour longer and, 20 moves longer than it needed to be, where if I had played correctly, when I won that piece, I had this simple follow-up and it would have been over a lot quicker. But that's what happens. And again, that's why I wanted to use this sort of ugly game, because this really lends itself to engine analysis. I can look at all these different lines. So let's just stop for a minute. What did we learn from using the engine? I was able to look at the opening, and I missed that knight b5 idea. And I was able to think, psychologically, why did I miss that move? I was able to look at my, not blunder, but my miss, where I missed that tactical shot that won a pawn. It was a very basic tactic. If I were annotating the game, I wouldn't have even given it an exclamation point because the tactic was so obvious, but I missed it. But the move I played instead wasn't a blunder. All right. And so you have to get into the idea that, at this level, good enough is often better than perfect. All right. So I blew winning a pawn. But then immediately after that, he committed a double question mark blunder where I won a piece. But then after I won the piece, I screwed up the follow-up. This is all very, very typical at the amateur level. All right. And like I said, this was not my best night. But again, this is typical. You see this at the club all the time. Very, very ugly, scrappy game. But then I stepped it up in the end game. And I handled my bishop against his knight very well. I'm looking at a move now where he was threatening a pawn. And rather than move the bishop back to a passive square to protect the pawn, I simply moved my king further to eat his pawns because I analyzed. I saw that, fine, he's going to take a pawn with my knight, but I'm going to get a winning position because my king is going to eat his king side, not queen side, his king side pawns, and my bishop is covering the queen side. So here I saw that, as Danny Kopech would say, it's one of those positions where you're probably going to win, but you can't lose, right? You might win, but you can't lose. I kind of smelled the win here. I wasn't quite sure, but it looked that way. And then I kept moving my king. He wins a pawn. Then I take a pawn with my king. And then here it was pretty much decisive. What's going to happen is he basically has to give up his knight for a passed pawn. So what we have now is, obviously we both have kings. He has a pawn. I have a bishop and a pawn, but my king is going to win his final pawn. So basically it's now king, pawn, and bishop against king. So, I converted and got the win. Very, very ugly game. A lot of back and forth. And, I'll comment also, this really shows you the importance of endgame technique, because that can happen where you get an advantage, but you mess up and it ends up being a draw and you have to grind it out in an endgame. I've saved myself many times from that, where I was either slightly better, maybe even winning, and I end up dropping the ball and I have to grind it out in an endgame. So that's why those endgame skills are very important. And here it was more about king activity and piece activity rather than material. Okay, so rather than passively defend my pawn, I let him take it, because then I saw that my king can take his pawns. It was more of a counterplay thing. And all these different ideas I would basically play over and over in the engine. So hopefully that gives you an idea. Now, if you click on the review, right, it'll not only give you obviously the engine analysis, but the review will also kind of judge the moves with like question marks and exclamation points. But, even then, don't take that too literally, but the engine is a great tool. So to wrap this up, and I hope I didn't overwhelm you with too much information, but this is how I use an engine. To wrap this up, what did I learn? I looked at tactical mistakes that I missed. I looked at an opening move that I should have played instead of what I did play. And I looked at, when I won the piece, how I mishandled that. That's really an excellent position for study. How I had this little in-between move before I took his piece. I had this little in-between check that would have been decisive. I would have been up a piece clean and it would have been over. He might have even resigned, but because I missed it, the game took much longer than it needed to. Typical amateur stuff. I looked at some endgame things. So that's the beauty about using an engine. You're covering everything: opening, middle game, end game, tactics, even psychological. Because when I made those mistakes, I would stop the engine and say, okay, forget about what the engine says. Why did you make that move? Hopefully, when you look at that, that'll clean up some erroneous thought processes or processes, I should say. And the nice thing is, too, now it's saved in my database, the game, so I can go back and look at it whenever I want. So that's how I use an engine. I know this was a lot of information. You don't have to get too caught up in the numbers. The idea with the engine is not to explore, every single line they played. For example, if you have a position and the engine gives 4 different lines, you don't have to necessarily play through each line. You want to use the engine to understand where you went wrong tactically, where you went wrong positionally, what ideas you missed, that type of thing. You're not going to use the engine the way, say, Magnus would. You're kind of just getting a general idea of where your mistakes were and what you missed, tactical ideas. You don't necessarily need to use every nook and cranny. Think of something like Microsoft Word. Most of us use Microsoft Word just to type up, basic documents, things like that. There's probably 60% of Microsoft Word, as far as its capabilities, that we don't even use, right? I've been using Microsoft Word for years. I've probably only used 40% of it, and it still serves its purpose. Same thing with an engine. Use it for what you need. But again, with the numbers, don't get too literal. If it's like a 1.0 advantage or less, that's probably still closer to a draw. If it's higher than that, then it's probably more relatable to humans. But remember, the engine is not looking at 2 humans playing. It's looking as if it were 2 computers playing. It's always looking at the best response. So don't get obsessed with the fact that you didn't play one of the top 2 engine responses all the time. Where you should get concerned about that, as I said, is if you missed a tactic or a mate. And the computers, the engines are pretty much 100% accurate with that. So anyhow, if you do want to look at the entire game and plug it in, this ugly, scrappy game I played, which is a little embarrassing for me, still a W. But if you do want to take a look at it, there is a PGN, so you can just copy and paste it, put it in the engine. And that's pretty much how I use an engine. So I hope this helps. Really appreciate you listening. And I'll put links for things that I mentioned, such as the previous episode. And as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.